It's my honour and pleasure really to chair this second panel where we try to discuss possible ways forward on an Asia-Pacific digital economy governance regime. We had a pretty full first panel, including something that ended with some optimism, and we'll have plenty of time in this session to discuss the issues that were raised in the first panel as well. We know that this is an area of important regional and global commerce where we don't have agreed principles. Wendy mentioned the value of those principles beyond just multilateral rules as well. So I think we've got a great group of specialists here from around the region to help us understand the main issues and what might be possible in cooperation and rulemaking. Over to you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shiro, and thank you, Watanabe-san, also for this kind invitation to the APEC Secretariat. So let me quickly get to the point and share with you what we're doing in APEC. Let me just provide also the framework for this discussion. When we're talking of some sort of digital, standardization of a digital regime, digital economy regime. Let's put things in perspective from an APEC side. I'll briefly touch on the APEC structure, the initiatives that we've put in place, some of our studies. I also want to focus on the challenges and the aspiration. First, very quickly on the APEC structure, we're very hierarchical in that sense. There is the policy side of things where you have the leaders, the ministers and senior officials meeting to discuss issues. And then you have the working level. And that's where the business of policies and regulations are really thoroughly discussed at the working level. And this is through our host of, I've given you some idea of where it's discussed. And one of the challenges we face is how do we integrate all these discussions that are going on in the different fora, whether it's in telecommunications, whether it's in small and medium enterprises, the public policy on women and empowerment, whether it's in the HRD working group, the transport working group, the business mobility working group, the health working group. All of them have aspects of the digital economy that's discussed and looking at how you can, whether you want to talk about principles or frameworks. And ultimately, we hope that all these find its way to the consolidated discussion at the Digital Economy Steering Group, and that is guided by the APEC Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap and its implementation plan. Now, it's very detailed. It has got 11 pillars, and it's very detailed. One key area is, of course, on e-commerce. So let me move on. And I want to just, I know Wendy talked about it and Bilari also mentioned this, the different approaches that the US have articulated, the new administration has articulated on the digital economy, the stress on security and the digital technologies and the digital environment. Likewise, Premier Lee Keqiang has also highlighted their areas of interest and priority. And interesting for me is that Beijing intends to speed up the rollout of two fundamental pieces of legislation. Now, I go back to what Wendy said. Wendy talked about how if you don't do this fast enough, then the national regulations get embedded, and then you're going to have a real challenge in coming up with whether it's regional or global rules to manage this area. So very interesting to see how this is progressing. From an APEC perspective, we have a whole bunch of initiatives that have been put in place. Like I mentioned earlier, the digital APEC Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap and its implementation plan, there's the framework for under human resources, e-commerce, facilitation, and also in the financial area. The financial officials just met and they also talked about financial inclusion and how do we embrace the rules in this area. CBPR was mentioned, the cross-border privacy rules. We're still working to get more economies to buy into this. Interesting development on the online digital resolution area. I think that is also being driven by the experts and the private sector, not so much the policymakers. So that's an interesting one. And of course, the famous APEC Business Travel Card, which has now gone mobile. So these are areas of that are developing very interesting developments as well from our perspective. Now, from our research bodies, we have our Policy Support Unit has also done some work on, sharing of information, building capacity for the needs for building capacity around these areas. And very importantly, structural reform in the digital economy. A whole study has been done on that. The aspiration, as I said, is to have this very ambitious agenda on the digital economy, led by the digital economy, the Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap. Very ambitious. And not quite working towards rulemaking, but definitely laying the groundwork towards that end. And then you have the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040, which was adopted last year, which also sets out, and here it is, there are 3 pillars in this vision, and a key pillar is innovation and digitalization. The challenge now, therefore, is how do you start implementing all these ideas? There are lots of ideas unfolding within the APEC environment, but how do you do this? And New Zealand's priorities this year, and New Zealand as chair of APEC this year, they're also putting a lot of emphasis on digitally enabled recovery. This, you have to go beyond words. You have to look at how we can then put this into some concrete action. The Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, again, Wendy mentioned this, you now have Canada coming on board. It is a group of like-minded economies coming together and trying to push. So we go from a plurilateral, this is so APEC, going from plurilateral to a multilateral. And, and here's where I see the importance of middle powers, how like-minded middle powers can make a difference. You have the distraction of the US-China tensions, but you have the ability then, the possibility of middle powers coming up and pushing the agenda for the rest of us. It is, so, we shouldn't be, obsessing over that tension, rather focus on the possibilities. And here's where the role of middle powers come to play. Now, the challenge, having said that from an aspirational perspective, the challenge for APEC still remains. We are non-binding. You can look at it both ways. Because you're non-binding, you can have more conversations, more deeper conversations rather, and more candid conversations. But at the end of the day, where will these conversations lead to? And that's what it is. Well, you're in a non-binding, but the non-binding environment also allows for this free flow of ideas that you may not get in a very binding environment. Posturing will take place, things like that. But we also need to manage this because APEC is consensus driven. So any consensus driven organization will have some challenges that come with it. But at the end of the day, we want to look beyond the challenges to some of the realities. One reality is that APEC has that role as an incubator. We've seen how we've managed to do this in various areas in the WTO. We have this Pathfinder initiatives which allow you to explore and experiment. We have this platform for building capacity and sharing best practices. And like I said, we go from a plurilateral to the regional to the global, and for rulemaking. So there is a possibility to ride on the APEC platform, as it were. And as always in APEC, we take the living document approach, which means there is that opportunity for us to build and to strengthen initiatives that we put in place. So I hope I've managed that in 7 minutes. I'm not sure. Thank you very much, Shiro.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, perfect on the timing, and